The wheel of time turns, and ages come and go, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the Third Age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind rose in the mountains of mist. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but it was a beginning. The Wheel of Time turns and podcasts come and go. Welcome to WOTCast, a Wheel of Time book and watch club. We are reading through Robert Jordan's epic fantasy series and watching Amazon's Wheel of Time TV show. I'm Caleb Wimble, and with me are Katie Jarvis.
Hello.
Dan Katinsky.
Hey, everyone.
Keely Frank.
Hello.
And friend of the show, Nick Wicks.
Hey, everyone.
Always great to have you here, Nick. We've got a full house today on Christmas Eve of our recording, having our big holiday finale special, as it were, talking about the last episode of the first season in just a moment. Remember, you can find all of us at WOTCast.net and support the show at patreon.com/WOTCast. Your support means a lot. Even $2 at the Two Rivers tier helps. Join us on Patreon at the $5 Tarvalin tier, and you'll get access to special bonus episodes where we talk about things like Wheel of Time short stories, graphic novels, video games, failed TV pilots, and related fantasy epics like, pretty soon, hopefully, The Witcher. Email us questions, comments, and corrections via contact@wotcast.net with the subject line questions. We'll answer them here on the show. Real quick, before we dig into today's episode, I do need to issue a self-correction, which I can't recall if anybody here pointed me out in this direction or if I just stumbled onto it in the thread reading. But it turns out I was extremely wrong about Moiraine and Swan's relationship not being explicit in the books, which I had indicated in the episode where that was first revealed. And I sort of took that as like an interpretation of the closeness of their characters and something that I thought was a pretty cool change for the show to go that we were all really excited to see. Turns out that is not remotely implicit in A New Spring. That is a very explicit and textual thread of their relationship here, which the show is digging into at that point. So a little bit I think I'd warned people to be like, oh, don't go through this series expecting too much in the way of explicit, non-heteronormative relationships to be made outright. But it turns out there are actually quite a few that I had suppressed as a very repressed teenager at the time, or preteen when I first started getting into those later books in the series. There are quite a number of pillow friends, as Robert Jordan uses the term to call them. Not my favorite term in the world, but he means well, and as he established a couple times at conventions and at his blog around 2005, pillow friends are not just good friends, he writes. Oh, they're that too, but they also get hot and sweaty together and muss up the sheets something fierce. By the way, pillow friends is a term used in the White Tower. The same relationship between men or women elsewhere is called something else depending on the country. Anyway, I'm not going to read out all the passages, but suffice it to say there are quite a number of explicit moments laying out the very romantic and intimate relationship between Swan and Moiraine. Some of them are very good passages. Reading through a few of the collections here, you can find those on a couple of places, including a Reddit thread on the relationship between the two characters that I can toss in the notes, or you can just read A New Spring, or you can go to the the fandom wiki page for the pillow friends entry in Wheel of Time. I'm never going to get used to that term if we have to encounter it many times throughout the series. Anyway, last time we talked about episode 7 of the Wheel of Time TV show, The Dark Along the Ways. The party reached Far Dara on the edge of the Blight and were forced to confront their darkest fears. Secrets were kept, confessions were made, and at long last our dragon reborn was revealed. Or was he? After which, Rand and Moiraine snuck their way alone into the Blight, leaving the rest of the party safely behind, or so they thought. Today we're talking about Season 1's grand finale, appropriately or ironically called The Eye of the World. I'm really not sure yet. That's something we'll have to get into, whether it merits the title The Eye of the World even. This episode was directed by Kieran Donnelly and written by Rafe Judkins. I believe Rafe Judkins alone, if I'm not mistaken. The writing credit on this one says Robert Jordan's and Rafe Judkins. That may just be an IMDb error. But I did notice probably the largest quantity of direct character dialogue quotes from the book of any episode that I can recall, like unchanged lines of dialogue directly from the text, which is interesting because this is not an episode that hews at all closely to the literal plot of the last chapters of the book, which was something we had anticipated and some things we didn't anticipate. Anyway, we open 3,000 years ago, as some of us have predicted and Andrew had explicitly called out, with Luz Theron Telamon, the first ? Dragon, discussing an attack on the Dark One with Latra Posai Dekume, a fellow Aes Sedai. Luz Theron is played by Alexander Karim, a Swedish actor who is new to me. Latra is played by Katie Braben, an English actress I also only know from an episode of Doctor Who. We see Luz Theron wearing the Ring of Tamerlane, the original symbol of the leader of the Aes Sedai. However, he addresses Latra as the Tamerlane seat, Watcher of the Flame, suggesting that the role may have been split between the two at the time. And yes, that's not me mispronouncing that. They do call her the Tamerlane, not the Amerlin. And notably, Latra calls Luz Theron the Dragon Reborn in the course of this argument, suggesting that he is not, in fact, the first or original dragon, as he's referred to throughout The Eye of the World, the novel, but instead may be one of many reincarnations. What do we think of this prologue scene, which is nothing like the prologue dragon mount that we were expecting from the beginning of the first book that we've never actually gotten to yet, and I guess we'll wait for another season.
I was pretty underwhelmed. I don't know. It's dialogue, but it didn't really seem to go anywhere in terms of the episode itself. So I don't know. From what we had in the book, which was a lot more exciting, which is kind of a reverse of what's been normally happening, where the book normally meanders a little bit or has like lengthy dialogue sequences and it's on the more tame side. I feel like this is one case where the book is much more interesting and kind of action oriented, and they went with like a prologue that was a lot more tame and kind of just a dialogue sequence.
Yeah, I didn't love this whole scene because part of what got me so excited about the first book initially was kind of the drama of the whole thing and it being really graphic that he just like killed everyone and then had to come to terms with it. So I thought this was kind of boring. And then they pan out of the window and it was like a futuristic world with like flying shit. I was like, okay, what the fuck is that? And so
it kind of looks like those The World If memes of like a like quasi-futuristic Singapore meshed with Naboo from Star Wars Episode 1.
Yeah, so I didn't really know what to think, and that's kind of the whole vibe of this episode. I don't know what I feel yet.
I wasn't crazy about the interactions, but actually I really liked the part of that where they panned out to the whole all the card zooming, because I was telling Caleb, being in book 13 right now, there's like a lot of illusions that come into play that relate to that. So I liked how they're sort of setting it up with that part of this, but I felt like the interaction with the two, was a little bit confusing.
I felt similar to Keely, that I was just expecting something different than what I got, which is, I guess, the particular experience of reading the book and then watching the show. And I also thought, so the one thing I got out of that scene was like the specific information about like how the male and the female were kind of like trying to come together to guard the one power, which I thought was going to lead into a specific kind of ending about the Eye of the World. And I also don't feel like it did. So it was interesting. Like when I was watching that beginning, I was like, okay, well, they're obviously setting up the Eye of the World ending in some way, and this information is going to be pertinent. And then I didn't necessarily feel that it was by the end of the episode. So.
Yeah, I can say for Eric in Absentia, he was really excited by the sight of the future-scape as well, and what that might imply, even if it's going to be, significantly later in the books before we really dig into the world as it existed before. But yeah, it feels like there's this dialogue here is an interesting one to begin with the episode with, because it does feel like they're setting up the dynamic, like you said, Katie, that is not really fully explored in the course of this episode. It almost feels more like a teaser for future seasons than it really does as much a mirror of what's going to happen in this one, although maybe it has some resonances. So, I mean, I guess we glean predominantly in drama terms that both Luz Theron and Latra have very different imaginaries about the way to handle the encroaching threat of the Dark One, and that is going to be dividing their way of dealing with it. And maybe we'll come back to this scene throughout the episode if we do find things that are more reflective of it. For instance, well, it does sort of set up, for what it's worth, we're seeing Luz Theron's baby before things can go south, and there's going to be a lot of baby in a cradle throughout the course of this episode, so it's clearly trying to get that image in our heads early on, even if it's not the most subtle one. So we then go to intro sequence, and from there, I think we cut to the swamps of Dagobah. It was maybe Keeley, or was that Katie who described them as having that sort of feel when we're down beneath the trees in the blights, and it's Moraine and Rand making their way through. But what I continue to think is a pretty cool depiction aesthetically of the blight that we show here, and we get the scene of we get one of the boys from Far Dara who had done some sort of dare to come see how far he could go out beyond the city, and has now been morbidly killed by some sort of fungal growth thing that's gotten into him and exploded out from him. I gotta say, my first inkling that this episode was going to play fast and loose with details in a way that did not feel as careful as other parts of the show for me was where Moraine's like, she does the don't touch anything thing that Land does from when they go in the blight in the books, right? Like even a single stick can kill you when Land gives them that entire thing. And they proceed to spend the rest of the scene and every scene that Moraine and Rand are in here touching all the trees and like sitting down randomly and completely casually disregarding the environment for them. And this was just like such a jarring, like, I know this is a stupid little CinemaSins thing to fixate on, but it was like immediately like, ooh, that's not good attention to what is being established in dialogue and in setting versus the way that these scenes are being put together. Am I getting too nitpicky right away? I should probably focus on the things I like a little more first. But
that's to that point, because I think that's a good thing to call out, because it's frustrating that a lot of times locations just seem like new set pieces for the cast to have dialogue sequences. So it's like they're always like sitting down. So it's like Moraine and him are just chilling there. And they're not moving. They're not on the, they really need to work on kind of like the West Wing style of like you have characters in motion all the time. Like obviously they do it in excess, but it's a good example of you keep characters moving. They're doing stuff along like while having dialogue sequences. In this show, they're constantly pausing in numerous locations and just having long sequences of dialogue. So it's like Moraine and him are just chilling on some trees, like in the blight or whatever, and just talking things out. And like they keep doing this. So it's like they keep pausing and having very I don't know. It's a frustrating element of the show for me. It's like these locations need to be more than just kind of like backdrops for your conversations, and you need to be engaging with the environments a lot more, and you need to be progressing through them. But they're constantly just stopping and having like long chats. And to your point, it's like they're touching everything. They're just like chilling. It doesn't seem as intimidating as it should have been. I don't know. It's a huge frustration point for me, and I feel like this episode leaned into that very hard.
It's probably notable that one of our big things we all agreed on, or most of us anyway, on the last couple chapters of the book was we really liked the Blight and we thought it was a really cool alien new setting to get into, but we didn't get nearly enough of it, or the exploration that we wanted, the length of time for that deadly journey into it. And then here, what we got in The Eye of the World is cut down to the barest fraction of what we got in the novel. So a lot of this episode for me, I think the majority of my complicated feelings, there was a lot I liked, and I thought a lot that made sense and a lot that I could rationalize as practical necessities. But the practical reality I felt the harshest was having 51 minutes to get through all of this and just feeling like very compressed in the sequences here and in representations of things that we thought were too abstract in the book maybe sometimes become even more abstract here, and or more literal in others. So maybe that'll be a running theme we'll get to. But there are those things that become more concrete, and there are things that are in line with what we were hoping, or at least like talking about was probably going to happen. Because we get through the scene with Moraine and Rand talking and presenting the dangers, and this is, I think, before they get into the dreams or anything. But we cut back to Far Dara and the crew who's left behind, deciding whether to pursue and really just unsure what their next steps are. We have, I thought, a pretty good scene between Perrin and Egwene about Egwene missing Rand and saying like, I love him, what am I supposed to do? And Perrin be like, I love him too, but I forget what they come to in the course of that dialogue, but it was an emotional tenor that felt pretty good for me. And we are getting into the setup that we thought was going to be the case, where Far Dara has to defend against the Trolloc swarm coming in over the course of this episode. And we did sort of get what we had hoped in terms of we wind up seeing all the other main characters except for Matt playing a substantial role in the events of the finale. So that feels like a large dramatic improvement on the peanut gallery effect that we talked about in the last few chapters of Eye of the World. I don't know that I have much to say about the Perrin and Egwene moment otherwise before we get back to Rand and Moiraine. And any thoughts on that dynamic after coming off of last week's tension with the quasi confession of love from Perrin about Egwene and the spat that happened between the group over that? Well, he didn't really confess. It was sort of dragged out of him, I guess.
I don't know whether it's just me. It sounds like maybe it's just me, but I feel like with the Perrin, all of Perrin's, it just feels really clear to me that they're like, we want you to be brooding and angry and like confused. Uh-huh. And like yes. he's just his entire every he's in, he has like the same expression on his face, same like I don't know. It's just very, very like 2D for me. And I know he's like that in the books, but it's not. That's kind of how I felt going through the scene. That was the only comment I had on that scene.
It's a fair one.
I would agree with you, actually. I think that Perrin is the one character that I didn't feel got like more developed in the show versus the first book. I felt like the other characters, I actually liked them better in the show than I did in the first book. But Perrin, I felt like, okay, we got the sadness of he killed his wife at the beginning, and then that's kind of it the whole way through. He was fairly flat after that, and his wolf aspect was not nearly as exciting in the show as it was in the book. Yeah, and I kind of felt like that whole tension between him and Egwene was just like forced. Like, okay, that it just felt a bit forced. So then I thought it was a nice moment of the resolution, but I also felt like what conflict there was kind of silly to begin with.
We had been, I think that was one thing we had been kind of happy about before, that they seemed to be leaving that out, the weirdness of Perrin and Egwene around the Traveler campfires and everything. But I guess that was there all along, and we just missed that the show was still trying to put that in, where he's, at least they left out the whole, you're not so much of the making Rand jealous thing until last episode and this one. But we get back to the more exciting developments maybe of Rand and Moiraine in the Blight. And is this where, no, I guess still not yet. I'm kind of like scrubbing through the scene to see where, once again, I feel like the show loves to cut before scenes are finished. The Rand and Moiraine scene of them sitting down to rest in the Blight is cut into 5 separate scenes almost throughout the course of the show, of where they're pretty much in the same place in the same conversation, and we just keep cutting back and forth to other people and returning to it, which I think that's just a very common modern TV trend that I'm not like wholly fond of. I would prefer the episode is, more broken into like, do the whole scene, do the 15 minutes all at once with these characters, unless there's a really good reason to cut it in the middle for another conversation. It kind of just feels like it's spliced up so we don't forget that there's other characters. But speaking of me, I'm so hypocritical here. For the amount of time I spend decrying like CinemaSin style analysis of films and things, or like the whole, oh my God, they changed it from the book attitude towards stuff. This conversation with Nynaeve and Lan, where it turns out he is going to go after Moiraine. Well, okay. Again, should start with, there's moments I love here. A tear came to my eye when these two did the version of that exchange, exact words from the book of where Lan does this whole, I will hate the man who has your heart, but I will love him because he makes you smile, kind of thing. Like, because I'm so invested in these two characters here in the show and these two actors and the performances, that really got me here. However, the whole Lan's like, I can't track her. She has suppressed our bond. And Nynaeve's like, don't worry, I know a secret tell that she has, I guess, in the way that she moves through heavily wooded areas that will allow you to follow her into the. I'm just like, what? Excuse me? I feel like I'm pretty good at suspending disbelief in things. And I got past this, as soon as the scene moved on, I'm like, okay, whatever. And Lan honestly, barely comes back into this episode at all. But what? I did. It was again, a vibe check. Is my reaction like over the top here to some of these little bits of bizarre little changes to my mind that just don't seem to make much sense to me. I don't know.
Maybe I'm still on the hate for these relationships from the book, but every time that I could tell they were just taking dialogue right from the book, just come the fuck on. Like, this is what you kept? You didn't keep what fucking Loyal's supposed to look like? Nothing about Rand with his fucking sword, the dreams, giving them the you didn't keep any of that shit, but you kept this bullshit dialogue. So as much as I love the relationship that's building between Nynaeve and Lan, I just like, fuck me, like, move on. Like, get to something interesting. I didn't really enjoy that, and the things that they chose to do to like fill gaps that they didn't really need to have gaps if they just had stuck to the scenes from the book were fucking weird. And I don't really know why they chose most of the things that they did for this episode. I'm kind of just disappointed with a lot of it.
To that point, saying pulling dialogue from the books and everything, I was very confused by that scene, because was that repetitive from the last episode? Like, was that the same dialogue they used before? Because she's like, if I'm not a wisdom anymore, I can get married. And then he says, I thought he said that last episode. I don't know if I'm just being confused from the book, but I thought he's like, I will hate whatever man marries you or whatever. Was that just him rejecting her again in a very similar fashion? Because she's like, hey, we could potentially be together if I'm not a wisdom and I have a different label, or if I go to like, I'm about to...
You might be thinking of Egwene and Rand in the last episode, because they did.
No, I thought in the scene with Nynaeve and Lan in the bedroom, they had that almost exact same conversation where they're like, I can't marry. He can't marry. Like they come to that consensus, and he's like, I will hate whatever man marries you. I thought they already did that. Like they played that out. So I was very confused when that dialogue.
You might be right. Yeah, I didn't remember them having got there. I thought it was sort of resolved with Lan not wanting to at first because he's so faded and everything, and then Nynaeve coming into the bedroom and everything, and then and this feels like it was him reestablishing that because he has to chase, he has to go to the eye of the world where he assumes he's going to die. But
yeah, maybe to Keely's point, it's just I'm getting because it's direct dialogue from the book. I'm like, maybe I'm just thinking the book scene and I'm like interposing that on last episode, but I feel like they already had that conversation, so it felt very unnecessary to do it again. And I couldn't figure out, like, my husband and I were like watching it and we're like, was that him just flat out rejecting her? Because she's like, hey, there might be a chance we could be together, and he's like, I will hate the man who marries you, but I'll also love him. I'm like, is that your way of telling her no? Like, it just seemed really kind of sleazy.
I don't know. I think he just thinks he's going to die for certain where he's
but
going.
They haven't given any.
I'm not sure at all.
Well, that kind of flows into the next sequence of like the whole to die. Like if we move to the next sequence with like the characters that think they're gonna die, doesn't Rand like specifically ask Moiraine why she thinks everyone's gonna die, and they build up so much. And I don't know. I was that whole putting so much emphasis on the people that are gonna die really deflated the finale.
Yeah.
For me. So I just like, I don't know. I didn't like her explanation at all. It felt very.
What was her explanation? Because
I don't remember. I really don't remember.
Right, he explicitly asks her, like, does that mean you'll die? And then even says, like, you don't have to come. But then she doesn't. Also,
she just wordlessly goes down, right?
Yeah,
foreboding look.
Also, just you probably covered this last time, but that's not in the book, right? That's not a thing in the book, that if they go there, they'll die. That's just something they made for no reason in the show. That
didn't really pay off in any observable way, as far as we were wondering before where they were going with that. And I don't know. We do get one of my quasi predictions was that we would attempt to put all the hereto unestablished Baalzamon dialogue into meeting him in the final episode. He did not turn out to be possessing Podden Fane. We just straight up meet Baalzamon where Rand starts to fall into a dream state. He has a false wake up, which was a pretty creepy moment where, like the moss is sort of growing over his hand, and then seems, the fake out wake up, the Moiraine seems to get stabbed through the back of the head with a blade, and then we realize it's one of these Baalzamon dreams as he emerges with the blade and the face. Rand shoots an arrow in his fire corpse face, which then video affects its way into his head, Twin Peaks The Return style, to become actor Faris playing spoilers in the X-ray for the character name on Amazon, which I won't repeat because that's not actually given in the first book, or even I don't even know if it's given in the second. But yeah, and then we have our conversation that is the real first meeting and it seems like the first time the Dark One realizes that who is the dragon, or thinking that Rand is the dragon here. So what do we think of this Baalzamon and/or Dark One.
I thought the scene was pretty cool, and I was happy that we got an actual representation of the Dark One, and then like almost slightly disappointed when he so quickly turned into looking like a person, because that would be easier for everyone to deal with. But I'll have to say that like it was just before this point or at this point that I like, you know, you guys all told me that the Green Man wasn't going to be in it, but I was like, at this moment I was like, oh man, he's really not going to be in it. And so like my heart just sunk a little bit as I like came to the full acceptance of that.
Yeah, as soon as this episode started, I was like, they're not doing it. Like this show has not set up the pacing to allow for it at all. I mean, like every other time they could have done something like this, they've kind of backed out of doing it. So they kind of set the trend that it wasn't going to happen. So yeah, big disappointment there. But I did like the reveal of him, like the stabbing with the arrow and everything, and then the pulling away. And like Moraine getting stabbed too, even though it was a dream sequence. I think it was like the only kind of like fake out that actually worked. They've tried to fake kill like so many characters on this show already in season 1. And that's the only one I thought was effective. And we're like, maybe they are trying to pull a really big plot twist here in the finale and kill her off.
Yeah.
But it only stays for a second, then you're like, and then we both called it was like a dream sequence 2 seconds later. But it was an effective shot, and like the dialogue there actually kind of worked. I think this is the only scene I actually liked from this episode. A lot didn't work for me outside of the scene.
I wrote down a couple different things. The first thing I wrote was, is Rand fucking dreaming? I was like, come on. Like, of everything they've done, they're going to kill off Moraine. Don't buy. Not when she's a fucking producer. They're not going to kill her character right away. And then I did think it was really cool that he like pushed the arrow through his head, and I was like, there we go. And like now he's a dude. But again, they mentioned the Heron Mark blade. No fucking context. I still have no idea why that matters. And then, he kept calling Rand Luz. And so that was kind of confusing to me, that I just assumed that meant that he thought that I guess in the show version, Luz was the original dragon. And so now that would make sense if he's the dragon reborn, that he's just Luz for like the billionth time or whatever. But yeah, in the book, I think it's different, right? Didn't you say that he's called the dragon reborn, not the dragon?
Well, yeah, well, in the book, they call Luz Theron the dragon, like as in the original one, which may just be because he's the first one that they actually still have a memory of or a record of, as the show kind of hints here, that even Luz Theron was a dragon reborn. But also in the book, whenever Ballsma shows up, one, besides not knowing which of them is the dragon, he always addresses them as like by a whole list of names, like of prior reincarnations, like Rowland Darksbane and all the like Luz Theron Telamon, and going down the list of the others. I can't really remember offhand. I don't know why Rowland Darksbane is such an OC character name that one always sticks in my head. But suggesting that this is a dance that they've done many times over and over and over before, and always with the same result, leading up to the Dark One's inevitable victory, because things have changed in this cycle, and with Sayadine corrupted, things are different than in the prior ones. He immediately starts doing it's very like if not Darth Vader, then very, very Sith like temptation scene. And we're of course getting into lots of family history stuff again, and really emphasizing the you really believe that's who your father is after all this time. Like we're still really establishing that for Rand. It's funny that he said that one of the things that Ballsma says is, who would have thought the Dragon Reborn would be a fool, which is only funny because he thinks in the book, he thinks that like usually Luz Theron is a clueless moron in most of his incarnations, or at least that's the way that he always addresses him. But in this case, he's just nagging Rand specifically a bit in having no idea what's going on or what he's capable of or what it means to be the dragon.
So I was gonna say I liked the this part when I liked this part of the scene. I wasn't a huge fan of the kind of rest of the sequence that they had later on with the Dark One, but I just thought it was weird that they I feel like he showed up to like a black tie wedding. Like I'm looking right now, and he's wearing like what looks like a legit blazer. Like it has like lapels and like it has a seam right here on the shoulder. It looks like that shoulder pads. That just didn't jive for me. Like I thought it was like bizarre.
I think that's a pretty good character note, consistent with the with some things we learned in the books, though.
Oh, okay. Okay, maybe I could be wrong.
I don't remember. about who this avatar actually is, like who this body is, and where it's from specifically.
But it does feel kind of like, because it's like a 180 from like this fiery CG demon Dark Lord character, and then it just becomes so plain. So I kind of agree with Nick. It seems like a jarring contrast there. And he's not as sinister as, like, I think this dialogue works, but I also agree with Nick that I don't find a lot of the other dialogue very effective, and he's not very sinister at all. Like, I don't know. He's not pulling his weight enough, as like the actor's not. I don't know if it's the actor or just the screenwriting, but something's not kind of pulling it through for me, and I'm not getting enough sinister vibes from this character.
It's more, I feel like it's going more for the kindly, charismatic, well, not kindly, but the charismatic tempter kind of thing than the I will devour you and eat your soul version that we mostly get throughout Eye of the World, which I think could work here really well. And I also agree that it does work in this scene for the most part. But yeah, I tend to think it's the screenwriting or the dialogue for him throughout this episode that doesn't quite nail it, that is not convincingly. We get hits throughout this episode that, there might be legitimate reasons for, it mostly comes from the villains and from Pound and Fame, but, there might be an aspect of balance that's needed between dark and light, and there might be, maybe the Dark One has some sort of convincing argument at some point. But if he does, I don't think we get to it in this episode, and I don't think the temptation winds up being especially tempting in the later scenes in the course of this, and maybe that's the execution problem I have. But I would I think Fares kind of has he has sort of like a trustworthy vibe to him beyond everything that he is saying and beyond who we know the character is, that I think like he's well suited for that if the script lived up to it or gave him more to work with than the sort of vague things that he has here that I don't know. It's about as convincing. That's the problem. It's about as convincing as like Palpatine's speech at the end of Return of the Jedi. But Palpatine is not that character. Palpatine is the most sinister, like you're saying, Dan, over the top, obviously evil and corrupt and monstrous villain you can think of at that point. And we know that it's only sheer force of his power that is effective, that there's nothing actually persuasive about his argument. So it's a different vibe that this doesn't really execute.
Yeah, I feel like if you wanted to make this more complex and actually work for a finale, you would have been dispersed. Like, this is where I think the book is actually pretty strong. You would have set it up much earlier. If you don't want to go all like outright just like sinister vibes and really creepy dude, you got to really build in that relationship, and they could have had this interesting dynamic where he's constantly tempting him along the way. No one trusts Moraine anyway, so he could have been feeding into that. And that's why this is the only scene that works between the two. It's because he's not using, here's a baby in a family you could have situation, which is kind of just like, I don't know. It's like the lowest common denominator, but like he's actually talking about, like he's kind of planting those seeds of, can you trust Moraine? Like, is this actually the route you want to go kind of situation, which I think is a more effective argument than like, here's the life you could have. Yeah. Like, you could have this if you have power. It's like the most cliche hero complex where it's like, if you have power, you can have the life you want kind of situation. Instead of planting the more realistic seeds along the way of, are you sure this is the right way to create balance? She's held a lot of information out from you and built a dynamic between the two characters. So when you got to this point, it would be more impactful than just bringing him in the last second and trying to convince us that he has any kind of influence over Rand at all.
Yeah, I think that I didn't really like the fact that, I think Katie's the one that said it, or someone said it, that like he just becomes a dude, because it's just taking away from more of like the fantasy aspect of fantasy that I like, which is like not so much just humans being shitty to each other, but like also there being other beings out there and like the Trollocs and shit. So the fact that he went from like a demon to just like a dude was kind of disappointing, and I feel like if he was gonna go for that like charismatic, potential cult leader where you want to believe that he's not scamming you, but he totally is. Yeah. He didn't do it. They didn't set this guy up nearly as well as they did Logain, because I totally bought that from Logain, that he was like smarmy, but you weren't sure. Like that whole scene with the king, which like he just had more complexity to his character, whereas this guy, like Nick said, he shows up in a fucking blazer, and there was no, I didn't feel any inherent threat coming from him, and maybe that's what they were going for, that like you can't necessarily trust the Dark One or whatever, but like nothing about him screamed to me that the scene warranted the intensity that Moraine was giving it, because I was like, he's literally just this chill dude like just talking to them, and I'm not getting anything from it. And maybe like my opinion of the show, of this particular episode, was just going downhill with each scene. As soon as I found out like, okay, confirmed, they're not doing the Green Man, who fuck off loyal, who cares about your character at this point, it was just like,
no Forsaken showing up.
I was like, well, what else are they gonna fucking do? Because they're just making it like mean humans against mean humans, and I've seen this 1,000 times.
Yeah, to Keely, I want to kind of latch onto that last point you said, because that is the way my husband Josh summed up the entire. I kind of looked over at him when this episode ended and asked him what his opinion was, and kind of the wording you said was almost exactly what he said. It was like, only he talked about the importance, but like what you were saying with like warranting things, the show wants to like warrant all this stuff, and it's not actually getting there. So he's like, it thinks it's more important than it actually is. So it keeps trying to like build it up or put emphasis on things that haven't kind of warranted that at all. And this episode felt that way more than any of the prior ones. Like just, it's like, well, here's this. It's like it wants to tease things from the book and like build things out and try to build this universe and kind of throw in some of the book, but it's not establishing itself as its own entity. And it's kind of sloppily kind of trying to be its own thing, but also borrowing strange things from the book and just kind of piecing them together. It's like putting the building together, but not doing it right. It's like taking things, but not understanding how they actually play together very well. And I felt like this episode felt like such a mishmash of really poorly executed, like taking things from the book and taking unique things and trying to blend them together. And it felt like someone didn't have the blender turned on properly, or it was like broken, because it just like, as a narrative, this whole hour didn't work. Of like a television didn't really work for me at all.
On that same subject, I know we don't want to talk about the avatar as you put it, that is the dark one here. But I think it's really like strange that they chose it, because like the latter books, like how the plot winds up. So I'm like really almost confused about how they're going to have character represented in later seasons, and it's like already making me nervous of like too many. There's some weird like plot paths that are going on here.
Yeah, and I think just on a thematic level of the pieces blending, like Dan is talking about here, there's something for me, maybe a big part it's clicking that it's not working in this episode, is that the Dark One is presented here as fundamentally powerless in everything with Rand and Moraine. And that has been, we talked about the difference that in the last couple weeks, the interesting thing that the show is doing the opposite of the book there and saying that the Dark One is at his absolute weakest he has ever been, versus the books like this is the strongest he has been in 1,000 years kind of thing, and this is his moment, we have to stop him before he breaks out, is that it saps so much of the vitality out of the Balzamon scenes with Rand, leading up to a point where we see that he fundamentally has no power right now other than persuasion, which is a choice you can make. And that can be, there's a lot of fantasy fiction that I feel like executes that well. The villain who is actually only so powerful as other characters' corruption allows them to be. But contrast that with, we're finding out that literally Tarman Gaiden might be starting with the giant shadowspawn army pouring down that immediately has Far Dara convinced that this is going to be the end of the world beginning, and the height of the Dark One's agents, and as everything is falling apart in Far Dara, sort of. Although that goes weird directions, but the army is defeated rather easily, as it turns out, by a very small number of channelers, but then also other things go horribly wrong that we'll have to get to. But I just wanted to highlight that feels like there's a core thematic tension to me that this episode does not fully resolve or know what it, or I don't feel like it knows what it's doing with the Dark One has no power or he has loads of power thing. Like it's Katie, have you been wanting to say something? Sorry, I saw your icon going on and off there.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of jump in that hopefully it won't take us backwards, but I felt like the portrayal of the Dark One was super intentional, and it seemed like so different than the book that to me, like when I was watching the episode, I'm like, well, they're making an intentional choice to make this character more like manipulative and almost like mocking, and like it almost like the more classic like Lucifer character, like even like the TV show Lucifer, which my husband watches, I no longer watch. That's all. But like,
I like those comics.
This kind of like, I don't know, mocky, I will tempt you character versus just like pure evil, which is more what I felt like in the book. And then I think to keep moving us forward, I do think that portrayal sort of undermines slightly what Rand does in the end. I don't know. I know it's funny because in the book we were kind of like a little bit hating on the ending, the fact that he like goes into this portal and he is suddenly, with all the people attacking, and but in this episode I kind of missed him having that powerful moment, because I felt like his moment was just less powerful.
Speaking of the plotting of that, and this is yet another one of those details of a change that I just found so jarring and could not jive. The reason we'll get into this more in the episode, I guess. The Eye of the World barely factors in, and it is not the source of power it is in the book. Instead, Moiraine just happens to have a sa'angreal that is introduced as like, this was her master plan all along, was to hand a sa'angreal to Rand out of nowhere, out of her pocket. That is what she has intended the whole time for him to use to kill the Dark One. And it is just going to be the whole, I brought the bigger sword thing at the end of the day to this fight, which even that felt it feels intentional, but also in tension with the theme of that showdown between the Dark One and Rand, and the whole idea that it's actually about this moral battle. It's not about who has the bigger grasp of the one power to swing around, and yet it sort of becomes that anyway. Also because Moiraine brought the sa'angreal, which I just did not understand that choice. Why introduce that additional element? It felt like an unnecessary complication that I don't quite understand yet as a plot detail.
And we talked about this on the podcast episode last time, that like there was a lot of room for improvement on how the book handled the final sequence, like a lot of room. But somehow I feel like the show is more confusing than the book, because like Josh, who hasn't read the book, looked over at me. He's like, I don't understand any of this. He's like, why are they going? Yeah. Like, he's like, why doesn't she train Rand before they go to this fight? I was like, well, it's important they go there because he's going to break out and he's powerful. And then as soon as we get here, to your point, Caleb, he doesn't have power. He's like locked away and he only has influence. So then like Josh kind of looks over at me and he's like, well, he doesn't seem to have any power. So like, why did they have to rush to go like fight him? And why, like, none of it makes sense. So for an audience, especially that hasn't read the book, none of this is working as kind of plot motive at all. Because he's like, it doesn't make any sense why they're going there in the first place, because he's not breaking out. Why are they not at this other fight, like fighting off all the Trollocs? So like, especially to the audience who hasn't read the book, none of this is kind of computing at all. It just doesn't make sense why anything is moving forward the way it is. So then when they get to that final fight, no one even knows what the Eye of the World is, because I don't think it's visually shown at all.
Yeah, it's more confusing here. Yeah. The Eye of the World is so like, what even is it in the show?
Who knows?
I felt like in the book, I was like, I had to have Kayla explain to me the Eye of the World after we finished the book. And now I'm like laughing to myself because I'm like, well, at least the book gave us something. This episode called the Eye of the World. I mean, I think a viewer that didn't read the book would have literally no idea what the Eye of the World is.
They even have the line about Quendalar at the end, and the Heartstone is broken, but they don't tell us what that means because there's no explanation of the seals on the Dark One's prison here. No. Eric, my partner, speaking of Dan, like our significant others, like watching this thing, Eric did just read The Eye of the World a month ago, and he's like, what is going on throughout this episode? He kept asking me similar questions, so I don't think it's even just total newcomers. Like, if you haven't been obsessing over the book and show like we have, I feel like you'd be very lost throughout much of this, maybe.
Yeah, and I don't really get why, like, what was the point of that hole in the ground with the stairs? Like, you know, we were expecting it to be what they kind of described in the book in some way, and it's literally just a fucking hole in the ground. And Rand's
it looks
like,
cool.
Yeah, I mean, it looks cool, but Rand's like, what is this place? And Moraine's like, I don't fucking know. And then there just happens to be the symbol on the ground, and fucking the Dark One shows up on top of a yin yang symbol, and then Rand passes out, and it's like, none of this makes any fucking sense. Yeah. Like, why does he just happen? How did you happen
Is the yin-yang the Eye of the World? Did they say that too? I think they said that, and I don't know why.
Well, Rand just walks up and he touches it. He's like, I've seen this before. No fucking context. And then, like, why would the Dark One be there? Like, it just... And why would he be there at that specific moment? And it just... There's so much of it. And I'm like, why did... I need Rafe to do another AMA answer for this episode, because I just have so many questions.
Wait, Keely, so are you saying they said the Eye of the World is the yin-yang on the floor? Like the tiles were the Eye of the World?
I don't know that they ever... Is she just, like, they just go in there? I don't remember exactly what the dialogue is, but they just make it a big point of the fucking symbol on the ground, and that they're in some kind of hole, and then everything happens with the Dark One right there, and she kept saying, like, oh, we're almost there, we're almost fucking there, and then... So I guess we're supposed to assume that was the eye, because, you know, in the book then, the horn and, like, the banner, all kinds of shit is under the water. But that shit's all scattered except for the fucking rock she's holding, so I don't know.
Don't even get me started on how they could have, like, when they start just throwing the items around, like, we're gonna dig that up right now. I'm like, why? Why is any of this? And then he's like, oh, so we can use it in the battle? And they're like, no, And I'm like, why? Why is any of this happening when it's happening? Because it just, like, it was a downhill slide from there. Like, as soon as they went into, like, Moraine and Rand stepped into that and all the sequences started playing out, I'm like, none of this makes sense in terms of the context of the story and thematically and also pacing-wise. It's like, none of it, like, went together at all. It's like so that sequence and, like, him, like, gentling her, which was super big.
Oh, yeah. I guess we can skip to
yeah.
that. But that, I was like, whoa, that's a big, interesting change.
Well, that happened shortly after because he shows up to Keely's point. They're like, "Oh, what's going on here?" He falls unconscious, and then Dark Lord just shows up and then gentles her out of the blue, and it's like, I don't know. And then like they go and start digging up. I don't know. We can progress in order, but from here it's a downhill slide for me. Everything just starts not making any sense at all.
So first they stilled her, guys. They stilled her. Gentling is for men.
Let's not forget.
For women, in fact. All right.
Got a gender
Thanks,
every
Nick.
term. Yep.
But yeah, I mean, I like the stilling of Moraine was just what? It's really weird.
I didn't even think it was until like the end of the episode when she confirms it.
Yeah.
I just thought she was like temporarily like paralyzed or something. And so
Shielded.
that whole
Mhm.
yeah. So when that actually in the end when she's like, oh, I can't access my power. I was like, wait, he actually like took your power away. I don't know. None of it.
Yeah, did you guys think that whole scene was like super just not like extreme or anything? It was sort of, she was just like, oh
Yeah.
I'm stilled, and like he's like, oh, I just defeated the Dark Lord, and they're like, oh, the ground broke, and like I was like,
Okay, wait. We'll definitely we got to dig into that real deep, but we should talk about Far Dara first, right? We should because that's like the very last set of scenes and everything.
Do we have to?
I feel like we could. Okay, okay, maybe let's just do all of Far Dara now and everything with that plot line, so that we can go back to the stuff that. Yeah, to the random Moraines. I feel I do just want to say overall, as you were talking, all of you just, I'm like, I wish this had been. I would rather have had a cliffhanger. I would have rather this whole episode was like an hour of leading up to and developing these things more thoroughly up to then having a cliffhanger both at the eye and at the wall here. Because let's just say Far Dara happens fast, but so we start with them kind of already hinted, Lord Agelmar thinking that this is the end of days and the army's coming and Lady Amalisa is going to stay to defend the city with all the women while he takes the male warriors to go to the forward wall, which is like, cool sort of like Masada style fortress in the pass and in the, or the 300, is it at Thermopylae where the 300 Spartans and everything, that sort of deal here at the Narrow Pass or Helm's Deep, it's all of those things it's evoking. And this is basically getting ready for the world's briefest version of Helm's Deep sequence here, and all the characters deciding whether they're going to help with the Far Dara defenses, like our main characters anyway, and a rush of things going on, which we don't have to go into every single plot beat because there's so many. So let's just, whatever folks want to talk about, whatever you would like to pull out from here, because I think trying to summarize everything for our listeners would just get confusing. They'll just have to watch the episode to get a coherent timeline of everything that happens here, because a lot happens.
Did they? So I don't remember if they talked in prior episodes about the fate, like being able to be in the shade, because he has that line where he says, "Let's light all the torches so that like none of the fades can see." I think, and I kept thinking that's another example of like what Dan was saying earlier, where they're like trying to take things from the book and throw them in. That's like not working. Like, why would you one of those of all like things to like waste dialogue on? Like that was one thing that occurred to me in the battle.
I'll say something nice because just to raise the level. I thought I know we saw them before, but the Murdrals were just really cool looking, so that was great.
They are, and I really like their face design. I've got it, and this is sorry, still in nitpicking mode. I really do like that we see them, and I like that they're just presented like with that sudden lethality. I wish we would see them doing their shadow melding thing that they do, as like the most terrifying thing when they show up in the books. Or even just the fact that their cloaks just look like regular ass dark cloaks here, as opposed to the very way that they are introduced as okay, it's very weird. That rider is riding on the hill and it's really windy, but that cloak is not moving. And it's just this like so black, it's like a void. And I just happened to like the other week seeing there's like all these videos on YouTube of like these new, I don't know if you all are familiar with like ultra black materials that have become popular in the past decade or two. So like things like this Action Lab short of World's Darkest Clothing, this is one of many folks on YouTube who has this channel of doing like all these scientific experiments and then also just fun stuff that's come out tech-wise. Like this clothing that it's not Vanta black. It's another one. It's a IR flock sheet, which is this black material that is like 99.75% light absorbent of visible light and 99.5% absorbent of UV light. And when a person's wearing it, it just looks like they're a black void in the world walking around, even in bright sunlight. I wanted something like this for the Fades, even if they just did that with digital effect, where their cloaks would just be like pure black, but they kind of just looked like they were walking around a little bit. So sorry, I've had too many of these tangents of they missed the thing I liked from the book of their cool appearance and the being able to meld into shadows and teleport out of them stuff. But I do love the way they show up. I think Podden Fane is pretty awesome in this episode as an established villain who will be apparently returning pretty heavily in the next season, I think. Although they're changing the dagger in big ways in the operation. And this was very, very subtle. I had to with Eric. We were spent like 10 minutes rewinding to confirm in still shots that Podden Fane is carrying Matt's dagger, the Shadow Logoth dagger, with the ruby in the pommel. Because they just show it in flashes.
Wait,
and like
he
is? You see after he stabs Loyal and puts it away, it is the dagger. He has it. Which should mean, in book terms, that Loyal is very dead, and within seconds he is going to be very, very dead, and there's no saving him with the one power. But I don't think that's going to be the case here. I don't think Loyal is dead for a second.
I think they need a mercy kill Loyal, because I feel like they need to take him out of the series at this point.
Why has he gotten so little in this? He gets to have a pacifism works thing with Perrin minutes before pacifism fails to work.
I just hated Perrin this whole episode. They nerfed the hell out of his character this whole time, and it drives me nuts because like, okay, so all that build up, he's got like the wolf shit. None of it's happening now. You're not feeling anything now. Your eyes aren't turning a little bit fucking yellow, like nothing. And then he sees Podden Fane again, and he's like, huh, what? Wait a minute. Yeah. It like goes after him, and he looks at the axe, doesn't fucking pick it up because he picks it up later dramatically to stand there holding it and not do any fucking thing with it. So it's just like, I hate that this is becoming like the Rand show. Like, I don't want him to be the dragon. I don't want him to have any kind of significance because I found him so fucking boring in the book. And there were other characters that I felt like they could have done so much more with, and they shit on them. One thing that I thought was really cool though was I did enjoy just the Trollocs running at the wall. I thought that was kind of cool. But then I don't know if anyone noticed, one of the Trollocs looks like he's wearing a helmet, and that was cracking me the fuck up. There's like one shot where they show the Trollocs from behind, and then they pan around to the front, and one of the Trollocs like right in the middle is wearing like what looks like a helmet, and no one else is, and I just couldn't stop focusing on that stupid little helmeted Trolloc.
That might actually be a very funny Easter egg related to a long-running complaint in fans in the 90s and 2000s. Oh, there is this weird thing where a whole bunch of the cover art for the Wheel of Time books depicts Trollocs as basically humans with animal helmets on, with metal helmets. This is like a running thing on like the cover of The Dragon Reborn, or not The Dragon Reborn,
The Great Hunt.
On the cover of The Great Hunt and a whole bunch of others. Trollocs are just dudes with metal helmets that sometimes have horns on them. Like one of those things where, you know, clearly the artist did not have a chance to read the series up until that point, got a one-page summary sheet and was like, Trollocs are the horned servants of the Dark One. And like, okay, I guess this is people in some helmets with like Viking horns on. So I think that might be a joke, maybe, but I'm trying to scrub through and find the helmeted Trolloc. I don't know. That could be an Easter egg.
I was thinking the same thing, Caleb, because I had just read about that when I was doing we were having a whole offline conversation about covers and everything. I was like doing a lot of research into them because if I'm going to buy a bunch of them, I wanted to make sure I had consistent covers for the whole series. So I looked at that. I was like looking at The Great Hunt, and I was reading like Reddit forums, and they were all talking about that. It's like one of the major complaints with the covers was like the long running, just like Trollocs are humanoids with like weird like horned helmets. So like that's probably harkening back to that since none of the others have it too. But with that run that Keely's talking about, did anyone else groan when they transitioned to night? Because it's such a it's such a long-standing thing, especially amongst development teams. It's like when Hollywood decides to go dark, it's like a way to cheapen out on CGI and to like kind of like mask things. So it's like as soon as that scene transitions to nighttime, it's like, well, we're not going to be able to see anything now because they're trying to like keep up with the budget.
I thought they did it because lightning is not as cool in the daytime as it is at nighttime.
Primarily for budgetary, like you can hardly see the horde when they're running. You can get away with so much if you darken a scene, and Hollywood does it all the time because CG during the day is the hardest thing to do, and they didn't feel like doing it, so they're just like, we're transitioning to night now during the run, so like most of the CG can just be masked by darkness and you don't have to worry about it.
That feels fair to me.
Speaking of the special effects, I was wondering what you guys thought of specifically. Like, I actually thought at the wall, the special effects were pretty cool, and the lightning and the power streaming through the women. But I was like, for Rand's scene, I was a little underwhelmed by just like the sweeping black and white light, because I really wanted that like rope that was so specifically described in the book. So I was wondering if anyone else was missing that, or like just the discrepancy between Rand's like moment being so much less, I don't know, just so underwhelming compared to the Aes Sedai's moment, I think.
Yeah, it was pretty, and especially the contrast you're showing there, Katie, or you're talking about, like the burning of the faces of like the channelers was interesting. It actually gave it a little bit of a stake there, because it's like they're dying off in a row, and that felt like it was a lot heavier than just kind of the CG white and black kind of threads kind of being weaved that most fans have kind of said is underwhelming. I think Andrew talked about that last time. He's very underwhelmed by the way they show channeling normally, and that's like pretty much all Rand got to work with was just like the streams of CG like particles kind of flying around him. So I think the lightning definitely was a more effective sequence in comparison, especially since they're jumping back and forth between the two of those.
I think one of the things that like really bummed me out about this episode was Lady Annalise's character the whole time just felt really forced. Like none of her dialogue felt kind of like it fit with anything. All the conversations between her and Lord Agomar were kind of weird, and it just, I don't know if it was the writing for her or how the actress kind of portrayed that character, but something about it just wasn't working for me, where it didn't feel like it just kind of blended in with everyone else. I will say though, the one thing that I thought was really cool was so she's telling him like, you have to wear Dad's fucking armor, and he's like, I don't want Dad's armor, I want my own. And he wears his, and then like later on she's wearing it, and I was like, okay, that's pretty fucking cool. I was hoping that would happen. So like that was cool. But even when she like takes all of the power in and she's like, I can feel all of the fucking emotions, and that's like she couldn't let go of it, I hated that. I thought that was so fucking stupid. It's like, it just, however they were gonna portray her as like holding on to this power, it was just like, she feels emotional.
I liked how they did that, where like when they burnt out the Aes Sedai, because I think that's an important concept that comes up in the book a lot, and like I liked how they represented that, and how they do talk in the book a lot about how they're like so tempted to draw in more power, and that it can eventually burn them out. So I thought that part of the scene I like.
Can we have a moment of silence for all the Agomar fans from the book that just like he stands there and watches as this guy slowly pulls back his javelin and throws it straight at him. I was like, I laughed at that scene because I was like, that's the shittiest death I've seen on screen in a very long time. Yeah. It was just so underwhelming, but like it's such a disservice to his character, and I don't even think he died in the first book at all.
No, because he's in Great Hunt.
It was just like, what are you doing to this character? So like to Keely's point, like
they don't
she
like
felt
him.
like they didn't like if his sister didn't get a lot to work with at the end, like he got even less. They just killed him off in the most pathetic sequence ever. And I was just like, I don't know what, like that whole sieging was like one of the worst sieges I've ever seen in a fantasy series. Like, and I love when they do like Lord of the Rings, the sieges are like my favorite parts of a fantasy series because they're so much fun. There's all these tactics. They run at the wall like World War Z style, pile up, and then like next minute they're already through the wall and they're like in the field like fighting the channelers. I'm just like, that was, I don't know. I liked
the shots. I like the shots we got for the most part. I just felt like it was really rushed, and that it was the timing off, and we didn't get a lot. Like I like the look of the Trollocs, and again the fades there coming in and attacking, and some of the individual sequences, the design of the wall. But for me, it was mostly just that we flashed through it so quickly it didn't really feel particularly weighty before they got to the city, or even we didn't get to do the whole like everybody in the city. We had hints of it that they were all going to be helping set up and prepare and get everything going, but that just pretty much disappeared.
All the trebuchets and everything, or whatever, like the arrows they're loading up, they don't do anything with.
No, and we don't get the citizens defending themselves that they hint at, like in the Two Rivers and Emmons Field when they're fighting back with the pitchforks and all that. There's no time. We have to do all this in 51 minutes or 55 minutes.
Why didn't they make it longer? Like, why didn't they just make it like one of those season finales that's like double the amount of time? Like, it was so necessary and so obvious.
During all that too, there was like half of those 51 minutes were just the Dark Lord like talking to Rand with like a baby cradle and a Egwene next to him. Like we just all talked through like 30 minutes of the action when the rest of that episode was all just panning back to that farm the Dark Lord.
Mm-hmm.
This was just like step in part 2 for me. And like, I think, Dan, it was you who said that you were really afraid that it was going to have Dune syndrome of the newest Dune movie, where it's so good. And then the last like 30 seconds, they're like, okay, everything fucking all at once instead of leaving it on a cliffhanger. And they should have left it on a cliffhanger. There should have been build up. You know, have the Trollocs running at the wall, have like some kind of conflict between Rand and the Dark One, and then that's it. Like, stop trying to cover fucking everything, because they spent like 10 like milliseconds showing that I think Matt is supposed to be back at Shadar Logoth at one point.
Oh no, I thought it was Tar Valon that he was seeing.
The White Tower.
Was it Tar Valon? Okay, I
couldn't
couldn't
tell
tell
Tar Valon.
because
I thought it was Shadar Logoth. Yeah, I
it
thought
was
the same thing
dark.
as you,
I was like, so
I
what
thought
the
he went
fuck?
back.
And then, Nynaeve like died, and then all of a sudden there's the power, Egwene crying over her, and she's back. So is Egwene a fucking necromancer now? Because I can get on board with that, but I didn't understand that at all.
I think that was just a healing, and I think Nynaeve had only been like, medically dead a couple of seconds. I took it as Egwene, like, coming into her power, doing the magic defibrillator thing. I don't even know if Nynaeve was for sure dead. Yeah.
But they're just ruining stakes at this point, because using this power so frequently makes you feel like any character can be revived at any point. And like they keep trying to have like fake outs. We were talking about this. I was talking about this earlier in this episode, but it's just like, I'm getting really tired of every time you think a character is dead. They're wanting to do these gotcha moments, but she's not dead because we need her for so much. Like book readers know they need her for so much, unless they're just gonna. For a second I thought they might have just condensed that down to Egwene getting all the scenes for both of them, and they're just reducing 2 female characters down to 1, which I was like going to be really mad about, like condensing it all there. But then to do the fake out again, it's just like, how many times have we had someone die and then immediately the Aes Sedai just revives them? They're not, at least in the book, the first book, you don't get that impression they can just revive somebody from death that quickly. And it's like in the show, like they're constantly doing it, because they did it earlier where the fake dragon kills them all in that scene, and she revives all of them. Like,
which was a great scene, I thought.
It's a great scene, but it's becoming an OP ability. Whenever someone like dies, they just revive them 2 seconds later. So there's no stakes to anything, because you can just bring back a character as soon as they get killed, and we're not going to believe any of the deaths you do on screen, because they're just going to like undo it a second later. So there's no emotional weight to that. So it's like, it's this problem with the storytelling where it's like, if you give these mechanics in the world, we're not going to believe you whenever you try to kill somebody off.
Well, I think they are going to give us clear tells when a kill is real. Like they do the standard movie tells of, if you don't see it, it didn't happen. Like with Tom Marilyn, if you get stabbed in like around the gut area, but you're still breathing, you're not dead. Like Loyal in this episode. However, if your head gets clear lopped off by a fade in like one motion, you're definitely dead. Sorry for people, including Nick, I think, who was big fans of what's his name, that Shinar character with the eye patch in book 2. Uno? Is it Ugo or Uno? Yep, no more Uno. Sorry, that's a lost cause. But I think this also gets to, Dan, what you're saying is like they're introducing also basically secondary characters so they can then just kill them more dramatically. Like that, I mean, I think that's why, Keely, to your point, Amalisa feels so stiff and so forced. Maybe like Aegomar and Amalisa are just here to die so that the main characters don't have to die, but they still want to let Nynaeve have a dramatic sacrifice for Egwene, which that to me felt unearned for similar reasons to what you're saying, Dan, that it's like, if it's Nynaeve's dramatic sacrifice, let it be hers. You're clearly just killing off Amalisa for the purpose of these other characters' growth. And it's not quite the same as fridging. It's not like Layla in the first episode. But I do agree, Dan. It does get cheapening if you repeatedly introduce characters we know don't matter to the overall plot, or like even side characters that people like, that we can kill these ones off, but we can't touch these set of ones. That's not doing the Game of Thrones thing. It's not doing the what it means for Ned Stark to die at the end of season 1. Spoilers for anyone who's been living in a cave in the Swiss Alps for the past 20 years. I also have some news about Dumbledore. Anyway, I guess we're all kind of on the same page with the way that that's being handled. I do feel like they are going to find, like, normal TV and film ways of telling us when a character is good and dead and can't be revived, and what threats are in that thing. Because I thought that was pretty much like there was the only moment in this episode I thought was slightly tricky for a second was Moraine, but even that was like a 1 second, like, oh my God, would they really? No, this has got to be a Balsamon dream there. I think they're pretty much they're pulling their punches on most of the kills otherwise. I did think it kind of worked having Moraine having the dagger against Rand's throat, like that element of the whole battle. It was one of the only things I thought bringing much tension to that. Because I guess did any of us particularly buy the temptation sequence and the life that you could have? Did any of this work? The whole you could force your will upon the world and effectively, like, rewrite the minds of the people you love to do what you want, because that's totally a thing that any of these characters would do based on what we know about them so far. He said sardonically, but
yeah, I half was like, okay, just based on how women are written and men view women in the book and in the show, well, not so much in the show, but definitely in the book, I could buy Rand saying yeah. So it felt like ridiculous character growth for Rand to be like, but that's not what Egwene would have wanted. Like, forcing her to stay with him and get married and have a kid. Because, like, the book Rand is so much not that. And so, even though there is that disconnect where, like, show Rand is different from book Rand, it just still, for, like, a while, I was like, oh, this motherfucker's gonna do this. He's gonna fucking do this. Because
okay, so it did sort of work, you think?
It did a little bit, just because I figured, like, of course he would force a woman to do whatever the fuck he wants. Like, that's kind of just the vibe that I saw them going for.
I would disagree in the reverse, because it didn't work for me and I didn't have any hint that he would go for it. But I actually so Rand has been sulky and everything, but I think I don't know, Gil, I almost feel like that's a projection from book Rand more than show Rand, because this thematically, like, if I'm thinking about his arc in the first show or the first season, this should work because they start out with, like, they're in a relationship. He's, like, kind of letting her go, but it's always this back and forth, like, about
He's really unhappy about her maybe becoming a wisdom, right?
But he has more empathy for her, though, and he definitely loves her, so they kind of have a relationship going there. And I think this should complete his arc pretty nicely for season 1, where he's, like, kind of been on the fence back and forth about this, and then he's finally coming to the conclusion that she's her own person. But it just, I don't know, they didn't build it up enough where I actually believed he'd go through with it. So it's just like I was waiting for the moment where he'd just be like, oh no, I can't, like, in a very Hollywood style of like I like the conclusion he comes to, though. It's like she's her own person, she's got to make this decision, because the whole series sets up on the first episode that he wants to be with her, but she also has her own passions and dreams and everything. So they did, like, that's like one of the only, like, character arcs that actually laid the seeds in the first episode and kind of had a little build up to that. But I don't know, it still didn't pay off the way I would have done it.
I'm writing a scene in my book that, like, parallels this scene where the evil character offers it's a child, so at least that she's like a 11-year-old child, like, the chance to go back to her old life and have it just the way she wants it. And so I'm, like, watching it in the show and I'm like, gosh, how do I feel about this? I don't know, like, should I delete this scene that I'm writing right now, or maybe it is an effective ploy. I don't know. It made me think whether I liked it or not, and I wasn't ultimately sure one way or the other. But I do think that Dan has a point, and I think that from, like, a character arc perspective in the show, it made some amount of sense.
I think they could have, they missed an obvious way of doing it, which would have helped it be a little more plausible for me, which was that we see at several points, the Dark One, like, at one point he uses his power to slice Dream Egwene's throat open, and Rand freaks out, and then I don't know if it's Rand doing it or the Dark One, like, reversing the wound and cutting it in there. For me, like, the whole thing that the show is not even really hinted at, that the book starts to get into a little bit, is, the Dark One wants to destroy time, right? He wants to end, for him, the tyranny of time and break out of this cycle and this endless, like, going back and forth and doing these same things over and over and over again. And for me, if he instead is offering Rand the power to reverse time, put all the horrible things that have happened to you and your friends and to the two rivers and all these dead people that you grew up with that were brutally murdered in the first episode, what if you could reverse time to put all of this back to there? You would be the master of time if you accepted this power and, like, became my chosen one. To me, that's a much better pitch and doesn't involve and also has some ambiguity in terms of it's still it is still taking agency away from the other characters. And I think the way that eventually becomes the core of the scene, like, this is not my choice to make for them. This is not my choice to make for Egwene, but is more plausible in terms of and it offers way more, right? Like, to bring all those people back to life, or even if they had if we had the sense that Tam is still, they could have even had him still dying slowly of the Shayol blade that he was stabbed with in the first episode. It's like, you can save your father, you can rewind back, you can save all those people you loved and grew up with. Hell, you could even go back and save your mom or whatever. Like, this offer could be much more tempting than mind control everyone in your life into a better current world. I don't know. That seemed like an obvious thing they could have gone with there, because they even seem to be hinting at it with the time reversal powers and the time stopping powers in there.
I feel like they just did the dragon really dirty. Like, they could have just had him. Like, there's so many. I mean, you guys talked about the Green Man. Okay, they choose not to do the Green Man. I get it. But they could have had just I'm just picturing like explosions and like fighting the Dark Lord and just crazy action scene. And instead it was just so underwhelming. It looked like they were in this tomb from Tomb Raider, and like the ground kind of split, and like the Dark One was defeated and Moraine is stilled, and I was like, what just happened? Did I just fall asleep and miss like 20 minutes? Like, I don't know how we got here.
Yeah, Josh had this he said the same thing when the episode ended. He was like, that was kind of boring. Like, he's like, okay, like, if you want to, the show's almost forgetting that it's there to entertain, and it's not entertaining a lot of the time. So it's like, I don't know. I kind of agree with him. I was like, this episode was kind of boring. It's like, for being the finale episode, I've seen some shows with like a fraction of the budget they had that have been a lot more entertaining and suspenseful and could do a lot more. And I'm just like, going back to that question for like kind of our speculation from the beginning, where did the budget go? Because they do so little with, like, it's not nearly as big as the Lord of the Rings budget they talked about, but it's still a lot to work with. And I feel like they're not doing very much. It's not very like Hollywood with like what Nick's talking about with explosions and kind of effects and everything. It's like, you got the stuff they're doing is so easy to do in After Effects. You could get like one or two junior designers to do like the little like particle effects they have for like the Aes Sedai channeling and everything. It's like, why are you making everything so underwhelming? You can do so much more with this, even like just visually, to like spice it up a little bit. Like, everything is always just kind of like the easiest route possible in terms of like showcasing things.
It does feel like, even if the choice works, and this whole scene does work as it is, which I think it, I go back and forth on moments in it. It's still like, when he makes the decision to destroy the Dark One at the end, I agree, is not like a particularly exciting way of portraying that, and it feels like weightless, and I don't know if this felt like a deliberate acting choice for plot reasons that I don't know that sells the scene very well. That the Dark One and Faris, it just kind of seems like, oh no, like, it doesn't seem like a particularly. This is not even on. This is kind of like the classic, clashing particle effects ending. This is, we're crossing the Elder Wand and the whatever other wand is thing. But neither actor's really selling it here, even to that extent of that effort is being. Maybe there's not, because he's holding the Sangreal, and just kind of like a bunch of light pours out and the Dark One sort of fades away. Kind of, it doesn't even really look like he explodes. He sort of washes away a little bit in the light. I do think they could have amped up the drama of that at the end.
Well, because we have no idea what he can do as a character. You've got to, when you're doing a fantasy world or a world that has his mechanics that are outside of the normal world, you got to explain where everybody is and what their power level is. Like, it's crude kind of way of describing it, but like, you got to give people a sense of like how powerful each character is and what they're capable of doing. Otherwise, like, to your point, Caleb, I didn't think it was a clash. I thought it was all Rand having the power and him just making a decision, because I didn't think the Dark Lord was fighting that at all. So it's like, we don't know what characters can do. So then, like, when he takes away Moraine's power too, it's like a what the fuck moment for the audience, because they haven't established that he can do all this or what his capabilities are. So we have no idea what the stakes are, because we don't know what they can exert or what kind of like what their abilities are.
Yeah, when it finally happened, and they Rand is somehow now standing up and, looking at him, it happened so fast. And I wrote down, did he do it? Is that it? Yeah. That's all that happened? And then the next scenes where they show Moraine holding the Heartstone or whatever it is, I didn't realize that that's what she was holding. I thought she was holding, the Dark One in, a little, did he put him in something? And, because I didn't have any fucking context for it. So I was just, my brain was just trying to make up, okay, maybe he's in that rock somehow, because I don't know what the fuck just happened, and that would be way more interesting than what I just watched. But I did have a question about something I noticed about the whole like dream what if sequence with Rand. So when Egwene is talking to Rand, like he comes out of the house and he's all like shocked or whatever, and she's like, "Did you finish?" And he says, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And she says the lantern that Matt, something about Matt with a lantern. And then when they show Padden Fane talking to Perrin, kind of like, "Here's my exposition. I've been following you guys. I knew you were Ta'Veren." He's like, "You really think I fucking came to Two Rivers to sell lanterns?" And so my brain is trying to like make connections with Matt more because they did just write him out of this episode basically. So I don't know if that is a thing, but I just noticed that the thing that they initially had Egwene and Rand talking about was a lantern, and then again a lantern with Padden Fane.
I think you're definitely onto something there. I think they are drawing all those connections pretty deliberately. And Padden Fane might be the element of this episode I'm single most positive on, probably. Like, even though this is like also wildly different from the books, and I don't know how to feel about the horn of the Great Horn of Valier being in the city already and underneath everything. I think that as a change to me, I can see some cool places they can go with it and stuff that will be interesting in the Great Hunt. But I think I'm at the very least excited to have a face to to an antagonist for the next season, and for that to be this particular Padden Fane performance. I thought he was a pretty, in the very few scenes that he's had throughout the seasons, a compelling presence in episode 1 and in this one. And with even like seemingly the fades at his beck and call here, but it really all raises more questions than it answers. Even though he gives a little bit of explanation there, I'm curious to see where that goes.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like Padden Fane looks like that crazy guy down the alleyway that you see like somewhere in your hometown. Like every time I see him on camera, I'm like, what happened? What's gonna happen? So I agree. I think that the representation of him and the actor and how he portrays him, I think is really exciting.
Oh, something from Far Dara that we didn't talk about. Min left.
Did she?
She jumped on the back of a wagon, and we see her riding out and away. So I'm hoping that means that like she saw something, and that's why she left. Because that was just weird to me that they showed her having visions earlier, and then they show her just like looking kind of sad, riding into the distance. So I don't know. I hope that ends up being significant later on. But who the fuck?
Yeah, she had like the visions of Nynaeve getting roasted and everything, which I thought that was maybe hinting for something much, much later, but I felt like a little bit undercut by having that happen 20 minutes later in the same episode and then immediately undone. But it is curious what they're setting up with her, and that's kind of a fun way to leave a little bit of mystery open about what she has seen for all of their futures. Or does she just leave when they're doing the whole, the foreigners need to leave, the foreigners can leave the city, but everybody from Far Dara stay here to stand and fight kind of thing?
Yeah.
I hope we see a lot more of her in season 2 with that setup there. Lan arrives after everything goes down with the Dark One, and Rand and Moraine, which is where we find out that she can't channel anymore. She's been, I guess she still could be shielded, maybe. It's not really clear to me whether she is fully severed from the One Power or whether there's some sort of block put on her. I don't know where they're going with this, but but she's in a really bad and sad state as Lan finds her, and she can't lift the mask that she has put on their bond together here.
Sorry, just to talk about like Lance like showing up in this scene. Did anyone else, like, I almost laughed again at this scene because I'm just like, it almost felt like a Broadway production where it's like character enters screen. It's like, well, it's like Lan's been nowhere to be seen, and it's like, everything. It's like cue like Rand walking off. Now Lan, you show up, and like just walk into the scene and just like, I don't know. I really didn't like.
They wrote him out of the episode. Yeah.
And then just the way he just comes in at like the most, like when he needs to, it's just like, it felt like such a stage production. It's like, and now Lan shows up to have his dialogue with Moraine, they just could have had her go back and had that. It's like, to your point about like the really wonky kind of explanation for how Nynaeve had followed them in the first place, then tying that into this just so he could show up for that last 5 minutes and have that dialogue with her. I'm like, you could have just had that back at the fortress, like when she kind of reappears. Like having him just show up on screen for the last like 2 minutes, it just felt like such a musical style of like bringing a character into like the scene. It's like, and Lan's just gonna walk in now. Like, I don't know. I didn't buy it at all. It just like kind of took me out of the moment of realism.
Oh, well, they had that had to be purely pragmatic, right? Because they couldn't have him at Far Dara because he would insist on defending the wall along with Agelmar, and he would die before in the Trolloc swarm coming over. Or he would have to dominate the scene, like slicing through hundreds of them and making a last stand and everything. And they wanted it to be about Egwene and Nynaeve in that moment, and linking through Amalisa, right? Because I feel like they were just trying to get him out of the way because he was kind of in the way in Far Dara, and he'd be in the way at the Eye of the World, because why isn't, I mean, granted, they could have just had him go to the Eye of the World along with show up, and then the Dark One bind him so he can't move in the same way that he sort of.
Yeah, I mean, but that's a good point too. We didn't even get a single sword. It's a fantasy show. We didn't get a single sword fight because they break into the wall, throw their javelins, and then they're doing the channeling. So it's like they're not even bothering to have like Lord of the Rings had so many fun like sword fights between like orcs and humans and like elves and all that. They're like just cutting all that. They're not even bothering to have like any kind of fight sequences where it could have been more fun if all the soldiers are like fighting and they're like kind of going back and forth, and land could have been there in part of that moment, and then they channel down the lightning. But they keep sequencing things out to do like the cheapest thing possible, which is we have them take over the wall. You don't see any swords fighting at all. You're going to get one javelin thrown that represents them kind of dominating the wall. And then like we kill off the king in like 2 seconds. And then they're all just running through the field, and just like a CG crowd coming at them. We're just like kind of like, they never want to show interactions or really fun conflict at all. It's just like we're always going to do like CG channeling to like kind of represent how we fight because they don't want to hire somebody to do the choreography, or I don't know why. It's just like they're too lazy to actually show a sword fight or have like characters interacting. It's just I feel like they're always cutting away from having fun action moments. Like they're not even trying to attempt it.
Yeah, I feel like that it is the difficulty and the expense, right, and the logistics of doing those scenes on a large scale, probably, because they are doing some really difficult things to film, like especially in terms of all the horseback riding and all that. And we were watching those behind the scenes on the logistics that went into everything. But it does feel like that was another casualty of this episode being so compressed. And it's like where do you even fit that into the schedule of this thing if you actually have those fights? Although we could have. Yeah, to Keely's point, we could have had Perrin doing some stuff maybe when he shows up with his axe to those scenes.
When Nick's pointed out that they had time, they just wasted on pointless dialogue or things that weren't even in the book that feel like filler. We don't need I think this whole season's had so many filler moments, and it's so baffling because they don't have time for filler. Like it's not one of those cases where they're trying to stretch things out. It's like they're adding in this filler content and taking it away from what could be very thematic moments or fun moments. And it's like they always go for like just filling out with like 5 minutes of dialogue here, 5 minutes of dialogue there, instead of actually having some cool badass scenes that would make audiences want to come back for more.
I think but like my biggest issue with this last episode is that the more we talk about it, the more I'm realizing that to me this watched as more of a drama than like an action fantasy let's fucking go kind of thing, like there's so much hype in the book, there's so many like fantasy elements, and I was just ready to be like mind fucked with like magic and fantasy and all that kind of shit. I mean, that's why we enjoy like Godzilla movies and the Transformers movies, not because they're good, because they're fucking cool. And like this just didn't feel cool. This felt like so much buildup, and then it was like, well, they didn't want to make it a fantasy, so they're just making it about like politics and boring person interactions, and I get enough of that with my like daily life. I want to see Prologue just fuck someone up, so that's just kind of like a letdown.
To your point, Keely, I think they did hint at the first 2 episodes actually have some fun sequences like that. Like she's channeling a lot. They spend at least like 10 minutes with her fighting the Trollocs in the village. Like they drew that scene out. Land's fighting people. Yeah. So it's like cool. They're actually doing it. And those seem to be the only 2 episodes they put effort into to kind of like sell people on the idea of the show. And then afterwards they kind of just phone it in for a lot of moments. And like you had that cool sword fighting and the magic and everything. She was throwing rocks at them. She was channeling lightning. She was using fire. They put it all on display there. So it set it up as if they were going to do it. And I feel like they spent a lot of their budget or time putting those 2 episodes together to get people to buy into the show. And then they kind of just ride it on that goodwill of the first 2 episodes being really solid to kind of coast through the rest of the season. And it's a finale. You got to go all out for it.
Well, we do end on a big special effects moment with a mystery fleet of ships appearing with what appear to be at this point some designs we haven't seen, kind of Chinese like 16th or 17th century influence, like junk designs to the sails on these things. But then some folks dressed in a very different way than anything we've encountered, or even anything necessarily that rings with obvious parallels, who have a set of channelers speaking in a language we don't know and then summoning a tidal wave up towards a shore. And Eric, my partner, comments at this point, says, it look like those channelers are slaves with the things on their mouths. And we're just told this is the far western shore, and then it ends, and that's our hook for season 2. But in the interest of wrapping us up, Katie, do you have any final thoughts on this episode, on the first season, and on the experience of the adaptation so far?
I'll just say quickly, it's been a cool experience seeing the adaptation and watching it alongside the first book that we're reading. And I do feel like there were lots of choices and character developments made throughout this season that were really strong and brought the audience into the story. I will say that my least favorite episode was this finale. And that's a little disappointing, but of course I'm still going to watch on, and I think they had a large task to kind of create a show out of this book and this series of books, so it's more than anything been interesting.
And Keely, what about you? Final takes and impressions on this journey?
Yeah, I am really enjoying it. I wasn't sure kind of what I was going to think as we started reading, just because I had heard so many, like, this is a really, like, wishy-washy series that, you know, later books suck, or, like, books in the middle suck, and anytime that there's a long series, it's like, am I really going to put in the time to make through, like, for in this case, like, 14 800-page books, only for that some of them to suck in the middle? But it's been really cool seeing it kind of come to life in the show. And, you know, as much as I'll shit on the show the whole fucking time, I am really enjoying it. And the actors and actresses are doing a really good job with what they're given. So, you know, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily any of their fault. It's just some of the choices that I don't understand, and that, you know, hearing that there are people that haven't read the books and are still fucking confused is pretty disappointing, because I was kind of hoping that some of our hate for it would be that we have this, you know, the source material and it's not meeting those standards. But if people that haven't even read it are confused, then I don't know why they're doing what they're doing. But I'm going to keep going with it because I'm invested now.
And luckily, we still have all the fan favorite books ahead of us. I've yet to meet anyone, I think, whose favorite is Eye of the World in the series, unless, Nick, you're one of those exceptions. But certainly in all the polling, book 4 is overwhelmingly the Reddit favorite and the Dragonmount favorite. Not my favorite, actually. It's like my second or third. But a lot of people like The Dragon Reborn, the third book in the series. So it is at least a while before the ones that are universally disliked, like book 10, about which, if we make it to that point in our lives, we'll probably have to have some conversation about whether to cover the book with the same detail that we have done for Eye of the World, or our approach going forward. But there's a lot to talk about there for the future. For now, Nick, what are your takes on this finale and your thoughts as you're coming near the end of the book series and experiencing the show as it premieres?
I think that I think we've given them a lot of leeway in terms of what they can adapt from the book, and I've been reading the IMDb reviews too of these different episodes, and I feel like a lot of the fans everyone here are giving leeway and saying, "Hey, there's 800 pages in this book. You're not going to be able to hit all of it. Well, it's just cool to see what you've adapted and what you haven't." But then there's just these like inconsistencies and weird, like, illogical decisions that the characters make. There's, you know, some lack of dynamic like scenes and acting, and as Dan alluded to, like, somehow, despite the budget, some things just seem like just underwhelming, and like the CGI and it's not amazing. So I'll obviously continue to watch it. So, you know, I'll have something to talk to you guys about every week. But I think, out of, like Katie said, I think out of all the episodes, if we just ignore the one with that one warder who we'll never ever see again, the entire episode was about him. I think this was probably my least favorite, aside from that one.
Dan, what about you?
Yeah, I think they went in opposite trajectories. I think the book I started out not really liking very much. I think everyone in our podcast group will know that I was shitting on it a lot. And I think over time, I definitely start to like it more and enjoy where it was going. So whereas that kind of left me interested to see where the series is going, and I'm definitely invested in reading more. I think, unfortunately, the show took the opposite approach, where I was actually really into it when it first started. I thought they made a lot of good choices. I liked the cast a lot, made it more relatable in the book. It helped a lot there, but then as time went on, it kind of started unraveling for me. So unfortunately, I do feel like this might have been the weakest episode, and it's such a sting to be the last episode. And like finales are always so much fun for me, because it's like most of the time shows save up their budget and like all their plot lines and all the action moments for the finale, and that's the good release, and it's supposed to get you like pumped up for the next season. And I didn't get that with this show, and I get that for most shows, even the ones that have really stagnant middle halves. So I don't know. I think I'm more excited to dive into the second book than I am the second season. I'm a little weary about where they're going to go with it.
Yeah, I agree. This was my least favorite, and not solely for the changes it makes, but for what it feels like it could have done with where it was going and the opportunities they had in change. Because I think in the whole series so far, my favorite is right in the middle. It's episode 4, The Dragon Reborn, the Nynaeve centric and Loghain centric episode that probably changes. It's one of the biggest changes in a lot of ways to the structure of Eye of the World, the book, and the characters presented there. And it's just like, it's a wholly unique creation of the show in some ways. And that was my favorite of the season, because I thought all the things that they were doing were really, they were good ways of adapting those things to screen and working within limitations and putting everything together. Whereas, I think we've all said our piece on this episode as a finale, just not really cutting it. Though I do feel I still have a lot of hope for where they might go from here and what we might see in the second season in particular, which I assume they're going to keep moving. We took so many early Great Hunt elements into this story. I think it'll allow us to jump right into almost the second half of the Great Hunt and possibly the return of characters that we have not been seeing so much in the last few episodes. And so I'm pretty excited to see what they do with it still. I thought it was an uneven first season, but interesting. And I feel like a lot of thought and a lot of passion was put into trying to adapt this and to make something new that is also pleasing fans, which is a really hard thing to do. And even when it falls flat, like in the finale here, I think that we've seen that there is a lot of love in the cast and crew for the story. And as always, I'll just continue to say, like, I love the casting. That's like the one unequivocal shining light with the main characters. I think have been like a really wonderful representation for me. I remember saying when we first started the cast, I'm always shaky about having a show or movie adaptations vision of characters implanted in my brain, and I don't want it to replace the vision I have. But I'm happy to have most of these performances live rent free in my head as images of these characters in a lot of ways. So that's been a really one element that I like of seeing it brought to screen. So next time will not be next week necessarily, because we will be taking a bit of a post-book holiday break. And again, we're recording this on Christmas Eve. So happy Christmas to all our listeners to celebrate. Happy New Year to everyone in the turn of the year, and happy holidays in general. We will be back around the beginning of February, diving into The Great Hunt. In the meantime, if you are hankering for more episodes of the show, I encourage you to head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/WOTCast, where if you support us at the $5 Tarvalin tier or higher, you'll get access to 2 bonus episodes you may not have heard yet. And if all things work out with the scheduling, there will be some additional things for you to listen into there. Again, we've hinted at a possibility of The Witcher bonus episodes in the coming week. One of the other many big TV fantasy adaptations just pouring out recently, it feels like, and sci-fi on the streaming channels. You can find us all at WOTCast.net. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at WOTCast Podcast. This episode of WOTCast was produced by yours truly. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Caleb Wimble. Dan, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at PansyDan.
Keely, where can people find you?
On Twitter and Instagram at Keely_Reed.
And Nick, thanks so much for joining us again. It's been awesome having you jump in on these show episodes and getting your take on the season so far. And as you said, having somebody another fellow fan to nerd out with on all of this along with us.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. It was a fun season to recap.
And remember, folks, you can also support us by leaving WOTCast a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, your podcast platform of choice. Helps a lot. Number 2 way we find new listeners. The number 1 way, tell a friend about the show. Word of mouth means the world to us. That's all for today. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, this is not the ending. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time. But this is an ending. Farewell. There it is. I almost felt I was almost going to put in an apology for being like, sorry for anyone who is just flat out loving the show that we're ending on such a negative note of this final episode. But you know,
if you look at the ratings on IMDb, it's like consistently like 7 to 9 for all the other episodes, and this one's 6.4.
Is that really bad on IMDb? I don't read.
Yeah, it's not good.
Well, I just found a article where they interviewed Rafe on the finale, and he confirms that Loyal is not dead. And he also confirms that some of the writers are not familiar with the books.
What? Interesting.
Fucking great.
What did they do? Did he just like tell them what happens generally, or did they read Wikipedia?
So the question is, I did not expect the Horn of Valir to show up in this episode. Did you debate keeping it in the show? And he says, it's interesting, a lot of writers in the room, obviously, who weren't familiar with the books were like, why are we doing the Horn of Valir?
Oh, so they're not familiar with the series. They only read The Eye of the World. Does that
It doesn't even say that they read The Eye of the World. It says not familiar with the books.
Writing consultants that have read the book so that they have an outside perspective. That might actually be a good way to balance it, but I mean, they sound like the logical ones. They're like, why are we bringing this horn in at this moment? And it doesn't sound like they listened to them at all, and they kind of just went with it.
Well, he argues that the horn is too important for book 2, so you have to bring it in. So it sounds like he, at least at this point, went against what whoever these writers are were I don't fucking know.
I mean, I think he's right. I mean, I think we all agreed the way that it gets shoved into the book at the end is maybe pretty clumsy sequel baiting, but you need the Horn of Valir. I'll just say that.
They need to learn when to bring it. Like they can still have brought it in as like a finale thing, but it's like we're in the middle of a siege and they have a bunch of important officers just digging a hole to get like a horn out, and to an audience that has no idea what the horn is, it just doesn't compute. It's like what? Yeah, I just saw this episode right before we jumped on the call.
It sets up a little mystery when they start tearing apart the throne room, but then the episode doesn't pay it off for the viewer at all, right? Like in any way. If you don't know what the horn is, it's like they kind of just have to like tell you in the scene, is that the Horn of Valir, the one that summons all the dead back from the grave to the last battle? Can we blow it now? No.
Yeah, when they said that, I was like laughing because like they're like, oh, cool, they're gonna bring in people, and it's like even the characters in the show think that too. They're like, oh, this will save us, and they're like, no, this is for something else. And you're like, Karen's like, why are you doing that? Then like, why are we bringing it up right now? It's like, even the characters in the show don't understand the rationale of like why other characters are doing things.
So he also was asked about the whole Rand basically just having a fucking conversation with the Dark One. And he said that they really wanted to show the complexity of darkness. And that he said, so we wanted to really see that in this finale, that when we're talking about the Dark One or darkness, how different is it really from the light? There's much more complexity in what's going on with these characters and the choices they're making than you might think. We always talked about the finale as people imagining he's going to the Eye of the World to fight the Dark One. It's going to be flames and explosions and all this stuff. But Rand is really just having a conversation. I think it's such an interesting way to approach where he's going. Boring way.
What is the complexity of the darkness what is the...
That he's having a conversation about darkness and whether or not he's going to choose it, that it's not just explosions.
But what is he even... So darkness means... being a selfish asshole at the expense of your friends, I guess. That's the appeal to it. That's the... Yeah. That doesn't feel complex to me. That feels like the exact same choice that Rand is already faced because the villains are so over the top, and the Dark One is so obviously evil and has the army. It's like you have to believe that they're the sort of people that to become a Forsaken or to side with the Dark One, become a Dark Friend. You've got to be that kind of. Well, okay. There's one time they had some complexity to it. The entire series was maybe the Dark Friend. Is it Dana who they have show up in episode 3 in the mining town? And none of us liked the waving around, running around, chasing with the sword in the rain sequence. But she at least does get this cool bit about, hey, you don't know what it's like to try and make it out here in this horrible place in this world. Granted, a horrible place that we don't see anything about that society really, other than that they lynched in Aiel, which is pretty bad, admittedly. But she does give some sense to, hey, a lot of us are like saying that, oh, people might join the Dark One because of society and because of their place in society, and they're oppressed, they're downtrodden, they're poor, they're abused, they're discriminated against. So there are reasons to lash out and decide with the figure that wants to destroy the world order. But that is all we see of that. I feel like there's no other grounding this entire season to establish, hey, there are reasons why you might want to tear down the social order, except Logain. And he's mostly doing it because prophecy and because to fight the Dark One, right? Not because the world is a shit place that needs to be remade and maybe the Dark One can help us remake the world into a better place. Like that, they could have, if he wanted that ending, I would have seeded that throughout the whole season. I don't know. That's a direction they could have gone.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know you don't like the episode 2, or 3, whatever. I think it was 3, the one with the bar, the Dark Friend who's like the bartender. But I honestly think
I was mixed on it. Yeah.
Yeah, but she honestly feels like the most human and like actually tangible character. Like she had a personality. I kind of liked her, and she felt like a human being. Some characters just feel like they're written from the book, or they feel very static. She actually felt like she had a personality and was a character, and I really like that. Even though it's kind of a filler episode, you don't get a lot of characters like that in this show that feel like humans. So she's sympathetic. She's kind of funny. She relates.
You mean
to
among
the
villains, like?
Among most of the characters, they just feel kind of stagnant as like actual human beings. I don't know how to describe it. The writing isn't strong enough to make them feel like people in a real world. Whereas like they meet this character who's this bartender, and she actually feels like personality, feels like she has a life. And I don't know how to explain it. It just like some of them just feel like book characters. And sometimes like fantasy book characters don't actually feel like real people. They just feel like, I don't know, ways to progress the plot forward.
Oh, Keely just put in her thinking. I missed her. Gotta hop off. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend and Christmas. Yeah. Well, I feel like they did better on that than Jordan in the Eye of the World overall, maybe.